N7 Day 2025 is just in a couple of days from when I'm recording this on the 3rd of November, probably be posted on the 4th. And this is probably the last video I'll make before this year's N7 Day. So I'm probably just going to give some general thoughts, but I especially want to talk about what we may find out as for when the next game is going to take place and how they're going to move forward with that, because that's what everyone I think is really waiting for. Before we get into the video, please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. It helps with engagement, and I like answering any questions or giving my take on your own thoughts. Hit the like button so more people see the video. And if you really want to support what I'm doing here with all of my content, consider becoming a YouTube member. You get videos like this one just a bit early, and I really appreciate it. Okay, so N7 Day here in a couple days. I think what we all really wait for, at least me, I'm speaking for myself, and I'm hoping it reaches you as well. With these N7 days, and especially since 2020, since they've started teasing the next game, I think the majority of people want to know when the game takes place, and maybe if we get some clues on the general narrative of the game. I think the ending of Mass Effect 3, the whole situation around Mass Effect Andromeda, I think it's really left people with this, like, what are they going to do next? We know, after Mass Effect 3, which had a really controversial release, people were weird about the endings. I think that's kind of calmed down, maybe not entirely. They thought about doing a prequel covering the First Contact War, and then that got scrapped, and instead they did Andromeda. And we've read all these articles and saw these interviews where people were kind of burned out on Mass Effect, and they didn't really want to handle the ending of 3 and make a direct sequel to that game because it was so controversial. And how would you handle that? So they, some of the team went off and made Anthem, and then people, a new team essentially made Andromeda, which had its own drama. And, if you think about it, to me, it's still funny to this day that, at least to me, the idea around Andromeda was, okay, let's just bounce out of the Milky Way and we won't have to deal with any of that baggage, and we'll just start anew, but still in the same themes, still in the same universe. Well, not technically, but or I guess technically in the same universe, And what they did, in my opinion, with Mass Effect Andromeda, beyond the rough release and beyond the game, at least in my opinion, not quite living up to the Mass Effect trilogy standard, it's a decent game, right? The biggest issue with Andromeda is that it has thrown a complete wrench in what they're going to do next, right? When Mass Effect 3 came out and was released, they could do anything after that. There was nothing in their way, right? They could have made a direct sequel. They could have jumped ahead many, many years. They could have done whatever they want. They could have done the prequel. That would have been my preference. Instead, they did jump ahead 600 years in a different galaxy and continued the story that will now handcuff the next game. And I don't necessarily mean handcuff in a negative way or anything like that, but the simple fact is, no matter what they do with the next game, it has to take Andromeda into account in some capacity, even if it's a small one. And for, these years that we've been getting these teases and this stuff like that, we've had this impression that, like, well, maybe they'll write off Andromeda. Maybe they'll pretend like it never happened. It's so far in the future. They could make multiple games that take place before the events of Andromeda even unfold, because it does jump ahead so much. That doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. We've had multiple teases over the last, 4 or 5 years, where one of the first bits of art, concept art we saw after Mass Effect 3 showed a ship that we now know as the Mudskipper with what looks to be an Angaran figure beside it. We've, as recently as 2023, we got that poster with the N7 agent, and the little bar scene that's in the middle of that poster shows what looks to be an Angaran in this bar with all these other creatures that we've seen and all these other species that we've seen from the trilogy and Andromeda. And we also see a Geth in there. There's no situation that we've experienced so far in the Mass Effect lore or universe where Geth and Angaran should have been in the same place, but in that picture they are. Not to mention that in that 2023 N7 Day, when over like 5 hours they released that 30-second trailer in 10-second bits. There's a reference in there to, a callback or a like an emergency signal going out, and references to Andromeda and things like that, right? So we're in the situation where I think that the realistic possibilities are kind of down to two at this point, maybe three. I think that we could have a game that is essentially a direct sequel to Mass Effect 3, but still incorporates the knowledge that the Andromeda mission exists, and that would be its connection. I don't think that's very likely, even though that's my preference, if I have to be totally honest. The second possibility, I believe, is that they have a game that takes place hundreds of years after the events of 3 and tries to tie the universes together somehow, or those galaxies together. Now, what's difficult about that is that if for somehow after the events of Andromeda, the initiative and that whole mission there progresses enough that they could, in theory, send the mission back to try to come back to the Milky Way and say, hey, we settled. We're in Andromeda. We're settled. Let's try to figure out a way to connect these two galaxies, which was, in theory, or at least the story was, one of the reasons the Andromeda mission happened, is to like set up trade routes or something, even though it's a 600 plus year journey. The thing is, with jumping ahead enough to make Andromeda and the Milky Way exist in the same the same timeline, is we're looking at another 600 years in the future for them to come back in conventional ways. So you're looking at 1200 years after the events of actually Mass Effect 2, more so than 3, is when the game would take place. Well, that seems unlikely because we have suggestion that Liara is going to be in this next game, or at least featured in it in some capacity. Even though Liara is very young in the original trilogy, she would be 1300 plus years old. Now, we have some reason to believe that maybe that it is possible. We have Arya and even Benezia to a point who may have been one of the older Asari that we've seen in the series, but it doesn't seem likely, right? That seems like it's a bit far-fetched. The third possibility is they do some funky multi-timeline kind of game where maybe some of it takes place in Andromeda and some of it takes place in the Milky Way. I will say, going all the way back to that 2020 trailer, there are some references in there, and some people think they've heard some references to like wormholes and stuff like that. That would get us into a whole different, the whole time travel thing people have discussed and that has come up. The idea of a frozen shepherd being sent to the Andromeda galaxy, of all these like a multiverse storyline that they could do. All things are possible, right? We don't know. Maybe we'll know by the end of this week. Maybe we'll have some indication of what they could be doing with this. I don't know, but those feel like the most likely things. I think the wormhole thing, man, that could be handled delicately, and if it's like executed perfectly, maybe that could be kind of cool. It would, in theory, try to make everyone happy. What I will say about all of the possibilities is that we have to realize that by the time this game would come out, if we're 3-4 years away from release at this point, we have to remember that it's going to be kind of like a Dragon Age the Veilguard situation, where it will have been 10 plus years since the last game came out. Veilguard had the advantage of it had been 10 years since a really well-received game had come out with Inquisition. The problem with Mass Effect is that by the time this game comes out, it's going to be 10 plus years since Andromeda came out, which, again, not a bad game, but definitely not the highlight of the series. We're going to be looking at 15 plus years since the trilogy, right? And so no matter what they do, as much as people probably want it to be fan service and be for the fans and for the existing community, all of us millennials and older and younger who have been around for either a short time like me or a long time like many of you, the simple fact is that whatever choice they make with how to move this whole franchise forward, will probably be more based on how well it would be received by brand new fans, by trying to bring people into the fold, because there's a lot of us, right? And I don't think the next Mass Effect can kind of dismiss or not cater to the existing community. It's kind of what it seems like Veilguard did. I loved Veilguard, but I'm a brand new fan. I'm not really a Dragon Age fan. And I know there's plenty of Dragon Age fans who loved Veilguard, but there were more than I expected that seemed kind of hurt by it, and felt that it had kind of dismissed the previous lore and the previous games and choices that they had made, and like it had ignored their Dragon Age, right? So Mass Effect has to try to balance that. They have to try to appeal to new people. They have to try to make the old heads happy. And I'm hoping that maybe this Friday on N7 Day, we will get some clues to how they are going to do that. Feel free to hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think about all this, what you would prefer, how you think they can try to thread that needle. Like I said before, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, become a YouTube member if you want. That'd be pretty cool. I will be on Twitch this coming Friday for N7 Day around lunchtime, and whatever they do or don't show, we'll be jumping into it and doing some analyzing and theory crafting and stuff like that. So go and check out twitch.tv/BonDiesel. You can also check out all my other links and ways to support in the description of this video. That's all I've got for right now. So until next time.